Hello and welcome back to the Edge of the Box podcast, a podcast by WhoScored.com in association with Oddschecker. I'm Dan Bardell, your host, as ever, here to preview the weekend's Premier League action and delighted to be joined by Jonathan Wilson and George Elek to do just that. The first game we're going to focus on is Manchester City v Tottenham, and I'm going to surprise you here, lads. Lads, I don't know why I said that. I've got a bit of trivia for you. Oh, no. Manchester City v Tottenham at the weekend. There was a couple of strange transfer moves in the summer that I actually wasn't aware of that had happened. Herbie James and Egan Riley have gone from Man City to Tottenham in the summer, apparently. But before that, who were the last three players to move between teams?
Kyle Walker?
That's correct. That's the latest one.
Can you tell us which way they went?
So the next one, the next two, in fact, are Man City to Tottenham.
Adebayor?
Yeah.
What position?
I don't want to give too much away, Jonathan. I might as well give you his name if I'm going to give you his position. Okay, so he didn't really have one position. He kind of had two positions. I think I'm going to have to call time on it. Chorluka. Chorluka,
yeah.
That was, for some reason, that was the one that popped into my head, and then I remembered Kyle Walker. Let's get into Manchester City against Tottenham then. And last time out, Jonathan, Lo Celso came into midfield for Tottenham. It's a very attacking lineup. I mean, we didn't even name a centre-back in the team, and we'll come on to centre-backs later on in the podcast. But Lo Celso performed well. Do you think he can revive his Spurs career, or do you think he's just a stopgap until Maddison returns?
Maddison's clearly the first choice, but this is an opportunity for him to remind people how good he can be. And if he does well, then why can't he be part of that squad going forward? But I mean, Maddison has been brilliant since he got to Tottenham. He looks a player absolutely in the right environment. So I think the idea that Lo Celso would displace Maddison is unlikely, but you need a squad, and he can be Maddison's deputy, and maybe by playing a bit more can take some of the physical pressure off Maddison. So it's a chance for maybe he and others didn't think he'd have. I mean, I'll be honest. I was in the press room at Goodison watching that game with the sound off. Saw that goal. Was like, who was that? And then Lo Celso still. How has he not been loaned to Turkey? He's got loaned to Besiktas written all over him.
He's a good player, Lo Celso.
He is a good player.
High level footballer.
Yeah. Look, it's an opportunity for him.
Yeah, I guess bearing in mind last time out, actually, obviously they've got a load of absentees at the moment. Tottenham, the injury list is an absolute disgrace. They kind of create Kulusevski and him as kind of free eights, George. So in certain games, maybe now he's had that little chance in the team. Maybe when Maddison is fit, there is room to put them both in for certain games.
Yeah, and I think with Postecoglou, you got a manager who's very fluid in terms of what he asks of his players. I think there's a lot of attacking freedom, which suits Lo Celso. When you consider the players he's played under at Spurs, Conte, Nuno, Mourinho, these aren't the kind of managers you'd anticipate would be able to get the best out of effectively a technically gifted player who probably isn't going to offer you too much out of possession. He's fairly scrappy, but he's not someone who I think is necessarily suited to those players. And you look at the way that he used the ball against last weekend. Sorry. You look at the way that he used the ball last weekend, his ball retention, the way that he is able to create or basically develop, progress the ball into the final third, the goal that he scored. And it's, he isn't the only one. I always think it's the sign of a good manager. It's something we've spoken about with Eddie Howe a lot over the last 18 months. And I think we're going to again later on this show, is the measure of a manager is what they can get out of players that they inherit who maybe aren't playing particularly well. And we've got a Spurs side this season who a lot of individuals have come on a lot under Postecoglou, and it wouldn't be a massive surprise if Lo Celso is the next one. He's clearly a manager and a head coach who encourages his players to play with total creative freedom and not to really get the shackles off in terms of what they look to do. And I think that suits Lo Celso perfectly. The only concern is he is someone, if you look through his career, the runs of good form are always fairly short, and that is reflected in the amount of time he spends at certain clubs. But he did, he had a decent load at Villarreal last season in La Liga, so he came into this season off the back of some good form. He's not a bad option to have, and especially given the Bentancur injury again, I'm sure he's going to get a lot of minutes.
Yeah, I mean, talking to form players, Jeremy Doku is actually the form player in the Premier League at the moment, according to WhoScored rankings. This is going by the last 6 appearances. He's got a rating of 7.95. George Haaland is second now with 7.79, and it is a Manchester City trilogy.
I was living in the future.
At the top. Yeah, it is a Manchester City trilogy at the top with Bernardo Silva at 7.61. Just to rattle through the rest, 4th is John McGinn, 5th is Mo Salah, 6th is Andre Onana, 7th is Saka, 8th Fernandes, 9 Dallo, and 10 is Douglas Luiz. If you're listening via audio, you won't have seen the face I pulled when I said Andre Onana's name, because I was not expecting to see him in the top 10, albeit they have kept a lot of clean sheets recently, Manchester United, so this probably helps. But back to Doku, he's up against Pedro Porro even this weekend, Jonathan. Doku is the form player, as I've just said, but he's also got the most successful dribbles. Coming up against Porro, he's having a good season in possession, and I actually really like Porro. I really rate him. I think he's a really good footballer. He's been dribbled past more times than anyone else this season. Is that where this game is going to be won or lost?
It could be. I mean, I think you've got to put that Porro stat in context, which is he's probably not getting a lot of support from the midfield in front of him, the way Tottenham play, that Kulusevski pushes up. So he often is left a bit isolated, and maybe equally, the centre back isn't covering behind him, so players will take him on more. So I don't think that necessarily means he's really bad when a player's dribbling at him. I think it means that the system Tottenham play mean that he's vulnerable to that. I think Doku is actually just key to Manchester City at the minute, because he clearly is a really exciting dribbler. He's scored goals, he sets up goals. I think the stats from Saturday from Liverpool game was that he attempted 17 of the 25 dribbles City attempted. So that's a huge sort of stacking on that left side. The problem is he completed 12 of those 17, which is really high, but it means he lost the ball 5 times. And for Guardiola's side, that is unusual. He doesn't like the ball being lost. And I think if you look at the stats, a lot of the chances City conceded have come down their left, the opposition right. And I think the reason for that, it's partly maybe Guardiola plays very high as well, but maybe that's necessary because of the way Doku plays. Doku puts in a lot of tackles, but I think that is also reflective of the fact he loses the ball a lot, so he's trying to get it back. So I think I think you really see this as Guardiola's sides, the balance of risk reward, that he brings a lot of positives, but there is an element of gamble there in that he loses the ball, and Guardiola's always hated that loss of control. So it does seem to be him playing a slightly different type of football. I think he's probably a bit better with Ake behind him. And Ake, I thought, had a really good game on Saturday. But then Ake really got exposed in the game against Wolves. So it could be that Doku destroys Porro, but it could be that Porro has a chance to go past him and create chances for Spurs. I think Doku gives City a lot, but he creates a vulnerability that isn't there when Grealish is there, because Grealish has learned, in his time under Pep, to be a bit more conservative, to take players on a bit less often, and to retain possession a bit more.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point that you've just made there in between Grealish and Doku. Grealish has kind of honed his game. He's changed his game from the player that we saw at Villa, but he does look after the ball very, very well. And I think he was due to play against Liverpool last weekend, but then he was ill overnight, and Doku came in. Grealish then started the Champions League game as well.
It seems to me that he's trying to pick Grealish in the tougher games.
That's what I was going to say.
He played in the Manchester derby. Obviously injury has disrupted that to an extent, and Doku's form has disrupted that to an extent, because if you've got a 21-year-old kid who's just arrived and he's playing that well, to an extent, give him his head, let him play, and take the risk a bit more. But I suspect as we get certainly to the sort of quarterfinal, semi-final of the Champions League, we'll probably see a bit. Assuming form remains roughly equal, we'll see a bit more of Grealish and a bit less of Doku.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Maybe this game against Tottenham, because it's against one of the better teams. I know they've got a lot of injuries. Maybe Doku won't even play, George, and it will be Grealish against Porro rather than Doku against Porro.
I'm never going to try and guess what Pep's going to do with his team selection, because I think it's basically impossible. Because you can make cases for both of them to play. As you say, it's not often that City get to play against a high line. We have to assume that Ange isn't going to change his ways here. But I think there's arguments for why both of them would be more effective against that. So the fact that that Grealish played in midweek probably suggests that Doku will come back in, especially because he was so good against Liverpool. But as Jonathan says, I often think with players like Doku, the way to deal with them, I mean, it's probably more risky, but the way to deal with them is often just to play a very high fullback against them and just give them something to worry about defensively and ensure they basically aren't able to just have the ball consistently taking players on and trying to beat them in ground duels. So I think that, as a neutral coming into this game, there are so many reasons why it should be a brilliant one. It's not often that you get to watch teams really take a game to City, probably because it doesn't really work. But, I think Spurs have shown themselves, and even in this kind of run of poor form, I still think there's a lot to like in their performances. And I think they've been a bit unlucky or a bit wasteful in certain games, especially the Villa game, obviously, where they could have been out of sight at half time. So, I'm excited to see how it goes. But Doku certainly is one of the players right now who, I can't remember many players of his age coming into the Premier League and immediately having the kind of impact that he's having when he does play.
I mean, George says there, Jonathan, about fighting fire with fire and playing a fullback high. One thing Tottenham do have at the moment is fullbacks, and they played 4 of them at the back last week against Villa. What can Postecoglou do here? I get that he likes this high line, and I'm all for a manager having his principles and standing by what he believes in. I think it shows strong management, in my opinion. But against Manchester City, it probably will be quite risky. But personnel-wise, does he move away from that 4 fullbacks thing and bring Eric Dyer back in, do you think?
Well, I think the logic of playing the 4 fullbacks is if you're playing the high line, you're not asking your centre-backs to do what we sort of think of as the traditional role of a centre-back. You're not really asking them to win headers. If you don't win the header on the halfway line, it doesn't really matter. So if you've got a team, if you're short of centre-backs, then the thing to do is actually to push up, because then you're asking them to do less centre-back-like things. Playing a high line, playing that zonal system, it's much more about positional sense, and then if you do get beaten, having the pace to get back. And that's why I think you might be reluctant to use Dyer in that system, because he's slow on the turn. So for instance, imagine they play the high line, you got Dyer up against Haaland, Bernardo Silva slips the ball through, Haaland's away. There's no way Dyer's catching him, whereas one of the fullbacks maybe does have more of a chance of getting back. I mean, Haaland is really hard to catch for anybody. And so they've got to be wary of that. But equally, would you ask players to do something they're less comfortable with and ask them to play deep and play something they haven't done all season? I think the way to do it is to say, no, we're going to cause City some problems. We're going to push up. They're not used to that. Let's see how they deal with that. And it might be that in the first 15 minutes they keep popping the ball through for Haaland, and there's been a load of chances, and maybe you do then have to reassess. But I think it's worth the gamble. And I think it's worth persisting with the 4 fullbacks because of the obvious vulnerability of Dyer on the turn.
I actually think people are questioning that team selection against Villa, but to an extent, it worked because they were up against Watkins and Diaby, who obviously Villa would have been looking to get in behind in that first half, and Villa didn't do it. And then Diaby got pulled at half-time, tactical change, and Villa changed up what they did, and Tielemans played as a number 10, and that eventually did open Tottenham up. But actually playing the 4 fullbacks, it did kind of silence Watkins and Diaby in that first half. They didn't really have a sniff either of them.
And Watkins is very good at latching on the balls played through a defensive line. That's sort of his sort of classic goal is running onto a 3 ball, beating the keeper in a 1-on-1. So if it's stopping Watkins doing it, okay, in the first half, less so in the second, maybe you can stop Haaland like that.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about Spurs' injuries, George. We can actually make an unavailable 11 for Tottenham Hotspur at the moment, with Whiteman in goal, Phillips, Romero, Van der Ven, and Sessegnon as the back 4. Though I'm pretty sure Sessegnon on loan somewhere. I thought, I'm not sure. Is he? Have I made that up?
I think he's there, isn't he?
I thought he was on loan somewhere. I could be completely wrong.
No, he's there. He's still there.
Oh, he's there. Okay, I am wrong.
You're thinking of his twin brother Stephen, who's
is he on loan?
He's just out.
You know what I'm getting confused with? This is embarrassing. I'm playing so much Football Manager at the moment, and he's on loan in Football Manager somewhere, and that's what's made me think that is like too much gaming. I'm like David James, circa 1997.
Do you want to do this podcast on your alternative reality on your FM game?
The gaming's really affecting my work.
You're in your late 30s. How do you have time to play computer games?
I just do. Mate, you've got to make the time for the things that you love. I've been playing since 1997. Nothing will ever
If
stop
you
me
only
doing
if you only sleep for 4 hours a night, suddenly the days become a lot longer.
Yeah, well, I mean, look at the state of me this morning. I wasn't even playing last night. In fairness, let me do that. I'll go through the 11. I'll start the 11 again. Mistake from me there. Rare mistake on the Who Scored podcast. Whiteman in goal. Phillips, Romero, Van der Ven, and Sessegnon as the back four. Bentancur and Sarr with Maddison just in front in the number 10 position, and then Perisic and Solomon playing wide off Richarlison. So there is there's a whole 11 missing. Some of it's a bit, a few players haven't really ever played for Tottenham there. But the injury situation, George, we were talking about injuries before we came on, and every team does get injuries. That is a hell of a lot of injuries, particularly in the midfield area. To Bentancur to come back and then lose him to injury straight away, it's really unfortunate because he was actually running the game as well.
Just to clarify, when you say we were talking about injuries before, just for the listeners and the viewers to know, that was Dan saying there was a media bias against Villa because no one was mentioning the 4 injuries that they have and how they're still coming forth. So
I was trying.
And then we asked you the injuries were. It took about half an hour to remember them.
No. I named them. I named those 4 players straight away. Trying to help the sign of a good journalist is that you ask for input from other people. That's what Jonathan was doing. He came to an expert, and I didn't give him anything of any substance whatsoever. But I was trying to help Jonathan out, trying to help out a fellow journalist, George.
Yeah, no, very kind. Maybe you can help me out. I mean, the injuries are obviously a nightmare for Spurs at the moment, and I think, the results, as I just said a second ago, aren't particularly good right now, but I do think they're kind of coping with it admirably.
Good journey.
I think they're coping with it admirably. And they are, but I think because of the way that the stubbornness from Postecoglou in terms of the way that he wants to set them up means that probably injuries have maybe less of an impact because it's more about the style than the substance to a certain extent. But coming into this game away at Manchester City, basically having to play half a team of players that probably wouldn't be getting the starting lineup anyway. I mean, the Bentancur injury is you've got to feel really, really sorry for him. To work his way back from injury twice, only to have that happen again and have that happen from what was a pretty nasty challenge from Matty Cash isn't great, and Spurs fans will rightly feel very, very aggrieved that this continues to happen to a player that has shown himself to be really important in previous poorer versions of Spurs, really, as an important player and who looks to probably suit the way that the Postecoglou wants to play in that role. So frustration there. I think this is a bit of a free hit. I think Spurs' start to their season means that there's no real need for panic. It definitely doesn't feel like Spurs fans are in any way turning. I think they're still enjoying going to games, and even when they do get beaten, I think they can see the positivity. And when certain players, certainly Maddison being one key one, but plenty of players to come back, it should in time improve them. I think it's pretty hard. I mean, having said that, it was interesting if you think back of City so far this season, or even in the last couple of weeks, Liverpool really struggled to get a foothold in the game last weekend. It wasn't until they were behind that they managed to kind of knit together any possession or really build anything. And it was effectively City just kind of camped in their half, which you don't often see with a Jurgen Klopp side. But Chelsea were the ones who kind of turned the game into chaos and just didn't really worry too much about City's attacking threat and looked to throw men forward wherever possible. And that was obviously that incredible 4-4 game. So maybe there is reason to think that a Spurs side who just will not allow City to do to them what they did to Liverpool, just won't sit off, won't allow them to have that possession. Maybe they're going to go after the blueprint of what Chelsea showed as to how you can get at City and bring them back yourselves.
Yeah, we've got a combined 11 for this game. It actually is. There's only 2 Tottenham players in there. So it's Vicario in goal, Porro right back, Akanji, Diaz, and then Ake left back. Midfield 4 is Foden, Bernardo Silva, Rodri, and Doku. And then it's Son and Haaland up top. But actually, if Spurs didn't have the injuries, because we usually base our combined 11s on players that are available only, there'd be more Tottenham players in there. The 11 would actually read Vicario in goal, Porro, Romero, Van der Ven, and Ake. The midfield would be Foden, Maddison, Rodri, and Doku, and then it would be Son and Haaland still up front. So it does show you that not only they're missing players, Jonathan, they're missing some players who've been really good this season.
Yeah, they are. I mean, it's losing 2 centre backs. I know one of them through suspension. is a big thing. Sarr, I think, has been excellent this season. That partnership with Basuma has been really important. And you sort of thought, maybe Bentancur can sort of plays in a similar role. Clearly a hugely talented player. Maybe he could replicate that. But he's now out as well. So it's really you basically in that game against Chelsea, you saw Tottenham's season just fall apart. In a game they were totally running. Son's goal gets ruled out in the next 30 minutes with injuries, red cards, silly goals given away, or penalty given away. That promising start was torn up.
Well, let's do our predictions for this one then. Manchester City against Tottenham. George?
Yeah, I think it should be entertaining. Man City will have too much for Spurs. 4-1 home win.
4-1,
that's big. Jonathan?
I mean, there's a bit of me sort of thinks that the lack of control City have had in the last two games and the how good Tottenham are in transition means they could cause some problems. I think Ruben Dias has been really poor the last month. Very bad game against Leipzig in midweek. But I've still gone City to win 2-0.
Yeah, I've gone for 2-0 to Manchester City as well, but your spiel there has kind of put me off a
little
bit. I can't change my prediction, but I take what you're saying.
City were in control against Liverpool, especially first half.
Liverpool had chances on the break.
Yeah.
Darwin Nunez had a couple of really good chances on the break, or chances to create chances. And I was watching that thinking that I wasn't surprised when Liverpool equalised, put it that way. I felt there was enough vulnerability about City to feel Liverpool could get back into it, even though City were dominating possession, were largely in Liverpool's half. They didn't look comfortable in that possession. And I think that's one of the things that Doku creates. Great as he is in creating chances, he also gives them they're not quite as invulnerable as they have been at their very best in previous seasons.
I mean, I say this as someone who's predicted Manchester City to keep a clean sheet, but when I'm watching a City game at the moment, it never feels like one is enough because you feel like they will concede. This season, what they did at the back end of last season was built on a very solid defensive foundation, really, and they kept lots of clean sheets. Nowadays, I feel like they'll concede in games. And Son's got a very good record against Man City, if my memory serves me correctly as well.
City's record against Spurs isn't good. They've only won 2 of the last 8 against Tottenham in the league. There's a League Cup game in there they won, but if you just count the league, it's 2 out of 8. I mean, if Stones is back, which he's been on the bench, I think there's a good chance he's back. That will give them that Stones and Rodri cover at the back of midfield, and I think Akanji has not yet adapted to that role as well as Stones has. So get the two of them together, and maybe they do look a lot more secure.
Okay. Let's do the rest of our predictions whilst we're here before we go on to Newcastle against Manchester United. Then an Arsenal v Wolves is first, Jonathan.
2-0 Arsenal.
George?
2-0 Arsenal.
I've gone for 2-1 to Arsenal. I will say with Wolves, every time I predict them to win, they lose. And I don't predict them to win very often. They always do the opposite of what I predict, so I expect Wolves to go to Arsenal and win this weekend. Brentford v Luton, George?
2-0 Brentford.
2-1 Brentford here. Jonathan?
1-0 Brentford.
Burnley, Sheffield United. I've gone for an away win, 2-1 to Sheffield United. Jonathan?
1-0 to Burnley, their first home win. It's got to happen sometime.
You'd think so, wouldn't you, George?
Yeah, 2-1 Burnley.
2-1 to Burnley. Okay. Forest v Everton, Jonathan?
1-1.
Yep, same here, 1-1.
Same here.
There we go. Might be a little bit of an insight into our odds checker treble later on in the show. We'll do Newcastle Manchester United after we've previewed the game. Bournemouth v Villa. You'll be surprised to hear I've gone for an away win of 2-1 to Aston Villa. Jonathan?
The same, 2-1 Villa.
1-1.
West Ham Crystal Palace, George?
3-1 home win.
I've gone for 1-1, but I'm not sure about that prediction at all. Jonathan?
1-0 West Ham.
Chelsea v Brighton, Jonathan?
2-1 at Chelsea.
2-2.
And I've gone for 2-0 to Brighton. Away win for that one. Liverpool against Fulham. I have gone for Liverpool 3, Fulham 0. Jonathan?
2-0 to Liverpool.
2-0 to Liverpool. And George?
I think Jonathan's read my notes. 2-0 Liverpool.
There's a lot of similar predictions going on there. We were very, very unfortunate last week with our treble, George. I can't remember exactly what it was. Hopefully you know what it was. It was me that let us down.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. It was a 35-1 treble. We had I had Luton to win, and they won. We had Sam put up Bournemouth to beat Sheffield United away. They won. And the draw. Hold on, mine was a much bigger price, so you should be giving me the credit. The draw was in the Arsenal game where Kai Havertz scored at Brentford in the 89th minute to scupper our big price treble, which is a shame. But hopefully we can go one better this time around.
Yeah, okay, let's do it then. I said that you would do the home win, I think, Jonathan. Home win. Can you pick a home win from your predictions this week?
So a home win that's kind of going to have slightly juicy odds. Is that what we're after?
A tasty one. A Wilson tasty.
Well, let's go Burnley Sheffield United.
Nice.
Good start.
Okay, the draw. I mean, so I don't get blamed if it doesn't win. I'm going to have to go for the one where we all predicted 1-1 Forest Everton draw.
Yeah, fair. And then that leaves me to pick the away win. So I do it.
Yeah,
I'm going to do it.
You've got to go Villa Ball.
Right.
Surely.
Brighton at Chelsea.
Oh, hello.
Well, I'm kissing that money away.
Yeah, so on the odds checker app or online, the best price for that treble is 28.13 to 1. That's with BetUK or BetMGM. The shortest price on the grids is 23.57. So that shows you get a much bigger price if you do use odds checker. So yeah, treble price there, just shy of 30 to 1.
BetMGM are loving it, aren't they? It was BetMGM last week.
Yeah.
But they're the ones that have Chris Rock doing the adverts.
Yeah. Maybe we should get him on the show next week.
Maybe he'll come on,
instead of Sam.
Yeah, forget Sam. Let's get Chris Rock on the show.
I'd like to see Jonathan's reaction
like.
if Chris Rock, scuppers his score in the predictions league rather than Sam Tighe.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a good way for any of us.
It's too late now. It's gone. It's finished.
Yeah, we were rubbish last week, all of us, with the predictions. Yeah. That your two teams got 3 points. I got 6. I got lucky that Villa won. I keep getting the Villa score bang on.
I had 2 more injury time goals that stopped me from getting it from 3 points to 0 points. And one of them is
Let's look at Newcastle against Manchester United. I know we've talked a little bit about Onana. I haven't actually seen the Champions League from last night, so it might not be a great time to talk about Onana's upturn in form. So does one of you want to run through with me what happened last night?
Okay, go on, George. You put your
I was actually at I was at Southampton against Bristol City, but I was watching it in the bar before, so I didn't see the whole thing. But I saw Hakim Ziyech hit a free kick straight at Onana, who managed to almost kind of parry it behind him into the back of the net. It wasn't his finest moment, but it's really, the Onana narrative at the moment is really interesting, where obviously the eye test is not particularly good, and we're seeing him make quite a few errors. However, if you're looking at the numbers and the data side of things, StatsBomb put out a tweet earlier this week about Onana saying that he's got the best goals saved above average rate in the whole league. And, a lot of people couldn't really believe that. If you look at the Opta analysts, which have they're a different data provider, but you can see them openly available online. They have Onana having the second best goals prevented rate or figure behind Kaminsky in the league. So you've got 2 separate, Opta and StatsBomb, they're both projecting that in terms of shot stopping, Onana is performing as the best or one of the top 2 best shot stoppers in the division, which I think is confusing quite a lot of people. I think that there are going to be multiple reasons for that. Manchester United defensively are not good. Like, if you look at the numbers so far this season from a defensive standpoint, in terms of pure shots faced, they have the 6th most shots faced in the league this season with 136. So that is, they face more shots this season than Burnley. They face more shots this season than Nottingham Forest. So naturally there, Onana is clearly incrementally doing some pretty good things, where he is making probably easier saves that not everyone would make, and he's doing them fairly regularly. But the life of a goalkeeper, and this was actually often the case with David De Gea, is if you make 1, 2, 3 really obvious errors over the course of 2 or 3 months, especially at the beginning of your spell at a club or in this league, then those are going to be picked upon and focused on. So, the narrative here seems to be that Onana is struggling, despite obviously the clean sheets recently, but then his WhoScored rating is high, his goals prevented rate is high. And frankly, when you watch Manchester United at the moment, they look so poor between both boxes that it's probably fair to say that if it wasn't for Onana, especially given the goals prevented rate, their season would be looking a lot worse. So, I mean, where do you stand? It's the numbers versus the eyes.
Yeah, Jonathan, because you and I want to carry on working, we don't care about StatsBomb and Opta. We only care about the Who Scored data that we've got coming up on the screen now. So we've got a Pope v Onana head to head. And actually, their metrics are very, very similar. The only thing that is way out there is Onana's accurate long balls per 90 compared to Pope's. He's 4.5 compared to 2.7. But everything else is kind of along the same lines. But like George says, where do you stand with Onana? Because the numbers look favourable. But when I don't know about you, but when I watch him, I just think I don't even think he's the same goalkeeper. I can't say I've seen him play loads for Inter. But when I did watch Inter in the Champions League run last season, I just felt he was a lot more assured than the Onana I see now.
Yeah, well, he was named goalkeeper of the tournament, wasn't he? I think in the Champions League last season.
Yeah.
I mean, I was at Goodison last Sunday. He made an absolutely brilliant double save there. He's made some sensational saves this season, as well as facing a lot of shots. And then you look at the 2 goals he conceded to Ziyech last night, both very similar, just low free kicks, not a huge amount of pace on them. One of them he jumps out of the way of, and one, I mean, who knows what he was trying to do with the second one. I think there's been quite a few errors where you sort of think he should have kept shots out. I think when there's a one-on-one against him, he seems to almost dematerialize. You have no faith in him in one-on-ones. So I think it's fair to say he has deficiencies as a keeper, but I also think that with a properly structured team that's set up for him, because he is very good with the ball at his feet, as that long passing stat suggests, he does give you something. And if you're playing with a very high line and he's coming out of his box, he doesn't really face one-on-ones in the same way. But because United still can't play with as high a line as I think Ten Hag would like, I mean, it's higher than last season because De Gea just couldn't play the ball out with his feet comfortably enough. But obviously, if you're playing with Maguire and Lindelof or Varane, these slow players at the back, you can't push up that high. I think the higher the line, although yes, it opens space up for people to run into, it's easier for Onana because I think what he's good at is that anticipation, coming out, mopping up behind the back four, rather than having a player running at him. So I just think the bits of the game that aren't great are being exposed at the moment. I think his confidence is all over the place, which is not surprising given the shambles that is often in front of him. I think even his passing, because he has players who don't necessarily show in the right places. I mean, you think of the game against Galatasaray at home, when Amrabat was playing at left back and his positioning was just all over the place. There's so many problems there that I think it's having an impact on him. So I think he's been very up and down this season, but I think it is explicable, and I think in a more secure system that's better suited to him, and it's the system to which United, certainly if Ten Hag stays on as manager, are trying to build. I think you will see his quality because you saw it both with Inter and you saw it with Ajax under Ten Hag. It's just that at the moment he is making mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, it says in the script here, has the familiarity of the Maguire-Lindelof partnership actually helped Onana, George? But you can't really be playing a massively high line like Ten Hag wants with Maguire and Lindelof. And, I say this kind of thing every week. And to be fair, they are churning out results in the Premier League, Manchester United. But it's 2023 and we're talking about a Maguire-Lindelof partnership. We shouldn't still be talking about that.
Yeah, I don't really think the numbers I read out a second ago with regards to how many shots they've conceded compared to other teams in the league. I don't think you can necessarily say that the defenders are doing an important job if they're having to rely on the goalkeeper to bail them out. Against Everton had an XG of 2 in the game and out. Their XG was higher than United's in that game. Over the course of these clean sheets, pretty consistently, teams are creating chances. I mean, it was obviously more comfortable against Luton, but Fulham were another side who outperformed, who out-XG'd United in their game too with over 1. So, from where I'm sitting, I mean, I think Maguire is having an okay season, and I think I consistently think he deserves a bit more respect from kind of all football fans. But you're right, I don't really see and I don't think a Ten Hag or any United fan will expect the Lindelof-Maguire partnership to be one that carries them to where they want to be. I think the main important thing, if United's form is to be sustainable with their 3 consecutive wins, it's going to have to be a case of stopping the opposition from creating chances rather than relying on Onana, who seemingly, despite what we've just been speaking about, is the person who's keeping them in these games.
Yeah, someone they relied on last season, Jonathan, was Casemiro, but he's reportedly angling for an exit at the moment. Kobe Mainu came into the midfield at the weekend against Everton. What were your thoughts on him?
Oh, he's really impressive. I mean, United, I think, a bit frustrated that he's had a lot of injuries this season. He had a very good summer, had a very good pre-season. I think they wanted to bring him in then. So before the season started, when Ten Hag was complaining about all the injuries they had, Mainu was one of the people he was going on about. And everybody's sort of like, really? Like an 18-year-old who hasn't played yet? But then you see how he played at Goodison. You sort of think, oh, yeah, he's actually, there's real quality there. I think, this is very much with an England hat on, but in fact, you've got him and Lewis Miley both come into playing at the back of midfield in what's sort of tactically a very difficult position. It's a position where you have to be able to read the game, which I think you would often expect that to be a role for an older player. The young players who come through often is to do with their pace or their sort of bravery taking players on. But with the two of them, they both seem to read the game. I mean, they've played 4 games between them or whatever, but they both seem to read the game exceptionally well. So, that position alongside Declan Rice, there might be some proper competition in by the next World Cup. But yeah, it's one game for Mainu, and I think United have a habit of getting overexcited by young players who come through. And we've seen it with Januzaj, we've seen it with Garnacho to an extent.
Makeda,
yeah.
I was at that bloody game.
Amad Diallo. I mean, good as Amad Diallo was for Sunderland last season, I'm not sure there's any evidence that he can physically cope with the Premier League. We shouldn't expect too much. He's 18, he's only just started, but those early signs, I think, are enormously impressive.
At least we haven't got Ole Gunnar Solskjaer coming out and telling us that he reminds him of a combination of Nicky Butt, Paul Scholes, and everyone else from that.
Roy Keane, throw him in there as well. Of course, I will say Diallo's doing very well in my Football Manager 24 save, Jonathan. So
great, glad to hear it. Where are you playing him? Yeah. Coming off the right, or
right hand side. Using him as the 12th man impact sub at the moment. It's going very well for me. He's working well, changing games in my favour.
When he leaves at the end of the season, get Jack Clark in on the left. He'll be fine.
Oh, yeah, I read something about Jack Clark yesterday, actually. Newcastle have got a lot of injuries. It's turning into the injury podcast. As Jonathan said to me before we came on, everyone gets injuries. But that has led to...
But I genuinely think there are more injuries this season. So when Almiron went down with his hamstring injury at Bournemouth, which is before the international break, he was the 32nd player at that point to be out with a hamstring injury. Obviously, the stats have changed slightly since then, but that is a huge number. People are getting loads of hamstring injuries. I don't know why that is. It might be to do with this sort of knock-on effect of the World Cup being at the wrong time, extra games, the COVID break, that everybody's been under a huge load for the last 3 years. It might be. I mean, Postecoglou said this when Van der Ven got injured, that he thinks the long delays for VAR, players standing around for 4 or 5 minutes in the cold, could be a cause. I don't know enough about physiology to know if that's likely. But I certainly think it's something that's worth asking, because there do seem to be a huge number of injuries this season.
Yeah, I mean, that's led to Newcastle using 29 players so far this season. That's a high in the Premier League, 23, 24 to 29 players is a staggering amount. Sheffield United are second with 27, Nottingham Forest third with 27 because they've got about a 55-man squad, and then Manchester United have actually used 26 themselves. So, all those numbers seem high. Actually, I wouldn't have guessed that teams even had that amount of players in their squad.
Well, it's partly because you have 5 subs now, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah,
that does knock it up slightly. I mean, it just means that if you're 3-0 up with 5 minutes to go, you can give the 17-year-old a few minutes, whereas maybe you'd have used your 3 subs before. So that will cause that to an extent. But I still agree. There's clearly been loads of injuries this season, and Newcastle have been worse hit than a lot of teams.
Yeah, but
although that said, 8 of the team that started against PSG on Wednesday were in the team that beat PSG 4-1. So there is still a core of the first team there. I know they're not able to replace them from the bench to the same extent, but I said Wednesday, I meant Tuesday.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Very unfortunate Newcastle on Tuesday. It was Livramento that played left back in that game against PSG, and he impresses me every time I watch him. But could it be this weekend Lewis Hall that plays left back? He had a good game against Manchester United in the Cup earlier on in the season. Is Lewis Hall the long-term Newcastle left back, George?
It looks that way. I was pretty surprised to see that they were able to get him in the summer. But he's a quality player at a very young age who's shown, again, he's the kind of player that if Newcastle want to get to where they want to go to, it's his kind of profile that is, given how it can improve players as well, you'd anticipate that he will be the person to do it. I mean, Livramento, he's had his injury issues, but he's another one who definitely has the quality and the capability to play there. And that is what Newcastle are building now, is if you have a squad full of depth as they're developing with individuals improving, then you said they're unfortunate on the weekend, and obviously the VAR decision was ridiculous, and it's just so annoying that I just feel sorry for all the Newcastle fans who travelled to Paris and for 98 minutes thought they were going to experience one of the great days and then have it taken away from them off the back of a VAR decision, and a contentious one at that. Although maybe Jonathan doesn't agree with his Sunderland hat on, but
no, I think that decision was a nonsense. I think they got away with 2 penalties earlier in the half.
Yeah.
But
it's like, people pointing to PSG having an XG of like 4.5 and stuff. Yeah, that's true, and no one's saying that Newcastle deserve to win the balance of play necessarily. It's just for that to happen. As nice
it's crushing, but I just sort of think this, VAR's against us. Well, VAR gave you 2 decisions earlier in the half that I think were more penalties than one that was given. Would you tell Gary O'Neill that VAR isn't against Wolves? No, because it manifestly is. I mean, this is Dan Bardell's influence over the Premier League with his anti-Wolves bias.
I don't mind. Well, I've been really impressed with Wolves this season. I think Gary O'Neill's done a really good job to recover what could have been a really tricky situation.
That's classic, sort of patronising them, kind of.
No,
for a medium-sized club, they're doing very well. Bless them.
They're not a medium-sized club, John. They're a small club. They're doing really well for a small club. I'm joking. Look, I've got nothing against Wolves whatsoever, of course, except when they play against Villa, where I want them to lose. Of course, I do the same when anyone plays against Wolves. Let's look at the combined...
So the only thing I'd say about the left-backs, I don't think... I know it's so easy to sort of think, Dan Burns just filling in until somebody gets old enough to replace him. I don't think you should underestimate how important balance is in a team. And while Dan Burn clearly is not as technically gifted as either Lewis Hall or Livramento, what he does give you is height and solidity. So when Trippier goes forward, they can shuffle across. They've got a very obvious back 3 there. And that balance is not going to be replaced easily. So I see that going forward, you probably want 2 attacking fullbacks. I see you want the option on both sides. But they've got to work out a way to... sometimes Trippier will tuck in, or sometimes a holding midfielder will drop back. And one of the positions they don't really have at the minute is a defensive holding midfielder. Yeah, their midfield works. It's nicely balanced. But one of the reasons it's balanced is that Dan Burns there doing a lot of defensive work. So I don't think we should just sort of think, Dan Burn will eventually be phased out and this will be an easy process. There is tactical tweaking to be done there.
In fairness, no one really plays with 2 attacking fullbacks anymore. That's not really how any team plays. Even Liverpool have to curtail and Andy Robertson nowadays because of the way Trent plays. Not many teams do play with 2 fullbacks bombing on. It's just not the done thing in the Premier League.
I mean, Andy Robertson still does get forward. Which game was it? Was it against Wolves when he scored that goal?
He did score against Wolves.
Burst in the box. So I mean, I take your point that he's sort of having to cover slightly because of the way Alexander-Arnold plays. But yeah, no, you're right. You're right. It's
Porro and Udogie get pretty high both.
Ooh, doggy. I was doing that all Sunday watching the game. I don't know whether Jonathan was on when I told that story.
No, his face suggests that he wasn't.
No, basically, whenever I watch Spurs on TV and the commentator says "ooh doggy," my dog's usually sat next to me. I look at my dog and go "ooh doggy." Don't know why. I just something that I've started doing when I watched Tottenham Hotspur play, and I was doing it on Sunday when they were playing against Villa as well, my own team. Let's move away from that nonsense though, and the combined 11 of Newcastle and Manchester United. It is Onana who takes the gloves over Nick Pope. We've then got a back four of Trippier, Maguire, Schär, and Dalot. McTominay, Fernandes, and Guimaraes is the midfield, and it's an all Geordie front three with Almiron, Isak, and Gordon. Of course, injured players or unavailable players do not make the 11. Let's do our predictions for this one then. Jonathan, I'll come to you first.
1-1. I think they'll both be
1-1.
knackered from the European games.
Fair. George?
2-1 Newcastle.
2-1 to Newcastle. And I have gone for 3-1 to Newcastle. So, yeah, all different predictions there. We finish the pod with the team in focus section. And this week it is Crystal Palace, who have lost 4 of their last 5. You scoffed at the suggestion of this before we came on, Jonathan. Is Roy Hodgson under any pressure?
I don't think so. I mean, they're 10 points clear of the relegation zone. And look, losing to Everton and Luton is not great. The other 2 defeats in that 4 out of 5 they've lost were to Newcastle and Tottenham, which you'd expect. They didn't play particularly well in beating Burnley, as Roy Hodgson accepted. So, I mean, they're not playing well at the minute. But, where are Palace going to be? Mid-table is what they are. And before that, they've won 1 of the last 6. The game before that, they won 1 at Old Trafford. So, it's a little bit of a blip. And if it gets worse, then maybe pressure does come to bear. But as long as his health is all right, and he obviously had that spell when he was away because of illness, and as long as he is back to full health, I don't see why there'd be any threat to him in the short term.
I mean, they're adapting to life without Wilfred Zaha, who's been there for a long time. Going to be without Eza for about 4 weeks, and Decore potentially all season, George. But one player that really thrust himself back into the action last week was Michael Olise, player you will have known coming through the EFL. What a player. What a goal last week. But what a player he is.
Incredible goal. Yeah, brilliant player, and someone who, I think he's showing it in flashes at Palace. I don't think he's necessarily impacting games as much as he should. I know that Palace fans absolutely love him, and any kind of neutral fan comes away from a game against Palace thinking, what have we just seen? And at the age of 21, I really strongly believe that his future will be amongst the very elite of European and world football. He's not someone who's just going to be a decent player for Palace. He has every single asset in terms of his physicality, his skill, his pace, and his final product to be playing for an elite team probably pretty soon. But that, I definitely take Jonathan's point about Hodgson, and I think he is, you have to remember the position that Palace were in when Hodgson came in last season, and the turnaround of fortunes that we saw, and the fact that he's done a brilliant job for Palace over a number of seasons now, over 2 spells. But that it does almost feel to me that there is untapped potential at the moment at Palace, just given the caliber of player that they've got. I don't necessarily think this Palace squad is necessarily suited to the way that Hodgson wants to play. And also, if you think back to last season's Palace under Roy Hodgson, he went very against type, and they played this really free-flowing attacking football. And as is always the case, they've reverted back to type now, and it's a little bit stale. It's functional-ish in that they're never kind of well beaten, but they don't. It's not particularly expansive. Now, the injuries to Eze and Decore obviously are big issues because they're 2 crucial players for them. But I just think that the Patrick Vieira experience seemed to really spook Palace, where they flew quite close to the sun in that first season, where they were really good and they were playing this new brand of football and everyone got very excited. And then it all fell apart and they were threatened with relegation. And it feels to me like there's both in the hierarchy at Palace and within the fan base, there seems to be this idea now that we've got to be really careful that we don't tear this up and try something a bit more innovative, because if we do that, we might get relegated, as was nearly the case last season.
Well, that's Frank de Boer as well, didn't they? And that didn't go well.
Well, I think that was just a poor appointment, wasn't it, really? The fact, having 2 former world-class players come over and try and play a certain way doesn't mean that every single young coach you hire to play an innovative style will also fall by the wayside. It doesn't work. It always frustrates me when people kind of package manager profiles together as if they're the same person with the same ideas and the same coaching staff and everything else. The players that Dougie Freedman brings in terms of whether it's Gahey or Elise or Eze or Anderson. These are young players whose technical quality and technical talent is the most important part of the reason why they are good footballers. And I think in that sense, you probably want somebody like, whether it's a Graham Potter or De Zerbi or, someone who has ideas of how to nurture and bring the best out of those players. And Roy Hodgson is a brilliant manager for so many reasons, but he's a pragmatist at the end of the day, and he's always going to be a pragmatist. He's always going to be risk averse and look to set up a team to effectively play out of a solid base and utilize any counter-attacking threat that they can have. And for me, it's always going to have a pretty low ceiling to where that can feasibly go. I don't think Hodgson should be under pressure now, but I do think Crystal Palace, I know Paddy McCarthy, his assistant manager, is very, very highly regarded, and maybe the plan is for him to succeed Roy at a time, in a summer. But it does, I think the blueprint for success for Palace shouldn't be, well, we need to find a succession plan for someone who can take on Roy's job and do what Roy does. It should be, how do we utilise what is hundreds of millions of pounds worth of talent that we have at our disposal that other teams playing a much more expansive style would want in their side? How do we utilise that to the best of to our own advantage?
I mean, all that's true. The only thing I'd say in Hodgson's defence in terms of style is that last season he had Zaha, Eze, Elise, and this season he's never had. Zaha's gone, and the other two have not been fit at the same time, or maybe for one or two games. But he hasn't been able to play both of them together for any protracted period. So I think there's only the three promoted clubs who scored fewer than them. So that is an issue. I think there's only Edouard has scored more than 2 goals, but they have got the 7th best defence in the league, and maybe when they get both Elise and Eze together, they will become a bit more exciting to watch.
But and I agree with that, and there are obvious caveats. And as I said, I don't think his job should be under threat now. But there's a player called Jesrin Raksaki who's played fleetingly off the bench and hasn't really looked particularly good. But he's someone who was on loan at Charlton last season in League One, and he was the best player probably in League One last season, playing for a side who are very poor. Often, a kind of League One and Championship level players come in and you can basically immediately see that they've been loaned to the wrong level. Like, it was just, he should have been playing Championship football last season. And given the injuries that you'd had, I would expect that probably a different manager would be more willing to give a young guy who hadn't played much Premier League minutes a chance. He's an attacking player, he's a wide player. But naturally, as I say, given that, if you've got a manager who's fairly risk averse, you're probably not going to want to take that risk. And that's understandable. But is it to the detriment of Palace's young talent? Maybe. They've got other young players as well. Franker, obviously, who came in the summer, who's been struggling for fitness. We haven't seen too much of at the moment, but they're in the midst of an injury crisis. It does kind of feel like there is a reticence to trust maybe the players who need developing, and instead, we're seeing Jeffrey Schlupp play wide left for most of the season. Who I guess what you're going to get. He's a 6-7 out of 10 player, but I'd like just to see a little bit more risk-taking, maybe, to see where Palace can go, because as I say, the team has the potential to play a very different way and maybe a bit more, just give a bit more excitement.
That's a nice little deep dive into Crystal Palace there, and that does us for this week's edition of the Edge of the Box podcast. Thanks very much to Odds Checker for continuing to back us and sponsor us. We really appreciate it. And thank you to all of those that are listening and tuning in as well. Wherever you are taking in this podcast, if you could do all the good stuff like, subscribe, comment, that really, really helps the podcast grow. We'll be back again next week to preview the Premier League action, as we always do. Hopefully our Odds Checker treble comes in, because it's another big long shot that we've gone for this week, but I reckon it's going to come in. I've got a good feeling about this week's treble. Thanks to the chaps for having a chat with me, and as always, tell all your friends and family about the podcast.